Today's episode was sponsored by Storyblocks Video. For all my life, I've been using Windows PCs until the last 4 months. Now, I've never really quite agreed with the way Apple prices their products, but here I am because of a single video editing software. My workstation is now a 2019 iMac 27-inch. The software in question is none other than Final Cut Pro 10 or FCPX for short. Just a bit of background history. Before moving my workflow over to Final Cut Pro 10, I've been a Windows user for more than 10 years and I was editing mainly in Adobe Premiere Pro. Now I know buying a whole new iMac just to use the software on it might sound a bit ridiculous, but that's why I'm here today to share a few things that I discovered about FCPX that made me decide that this NLE was actually worth switching systems for. And by the way, if I sound a bit funny, that's because I am actually sick. There is a crazy haze in Malaysia right now and it is making everybody sick. The first feature that really impressed me was background rendering. When Final Cut detects that you've been idle, it makes use of that idle time and puts your computer to work by rendering your whole timeline. It's like having an employee that does work without you having to ask. And it does make perfect sense because when you have an editing project open, you're not going to be in front of it working on it 100% of the time. So even if you have a particularly heavy timeline, like one that you've applied some color correction and color grading on it, after some background rendering, you would still be able to scrub through it relatively smoothly. Actually, I'm going to go with very smoothly. It's a feature that is really efficient and most certainly increases productivity because we all know how much fun choppy timelines are. Also, one more thing, background rendering actually reduces your final export time by a pretty big margin. After your timeline has been background rendered, FCPX somehow makes use of those cache files during the final export render and saves you even more time. From my testing, a 7.5-minute 4K video took about 2 minutes and 48 seconds to export if the whole timeline has been previously fully background rendered, and if not, that same video took 4 minutes and 58 seconds to render. You can also tweak the threshold for when FCPX decides that you're idle. It's set by default to 0.3 seconds, so I've set mine to 3 seconds because 0.3 seconds is a bit quick. The second feature is an easy one to love. FCPX is going to save your progress in real time. I've lost count of how many times I got betrayed by Premiere's autosave, but FCPX doesn't even have a conventional save. When I first moved over from Premiere, I was constantly hitting Command-S instinctively just to realize that Command-S doesn't exist in Final Cut. When you're done editing, you literally just close the software just like that, no prompts, no nothing, but it is saved. It's like the software completely takes the responsibility of saving the project away from the user. It's always saved by itself. And when FCPX crashes, it does happen, it just does so like 100 times less often than Premiere. You never have to worry about relaunching your software just to find your past 5 hours of work being completely undone. Someone could technically unplug my Mac when I'm halfway editing and I would be able to pick up pretty much exactly where I left off. So if you edit very often, that can totally save you a lot of trouble. But if you'd like to save yourself even more trouble, then you should totally check out Storyblocks Video, our sponsors for today. Now, I really wasn't kidding about the saving trouble part, because if you've ever put together a video, then you would know how tricky it is to get a hold of some footage that you simply don't have, and licensing stock footage is just too expensive. When you subscribe to Storyblocks' unlimited video plan, it grants you unlimited downloads of anything in the video member library. And that's studio quality footage up to 4K that you can use anywhere you like, including YouTube. And more than just stock footage, that very same plan even includes a collection of fully customizable After Effects and Apple Motion templates that you can use to easily add value to your content. All of that trouble and time saving without blowing your budget. Check out the link in the description to learn more about Storyblocks Video. Now in FCPX, your main big project file is called a library. So obviously your edit, your timeline is going to be in that library, but you also have the option of including your media inside the library. There's a setting that you can change. So there's the more conventional way that NLEs operate, whereby it links in every media clip from its source location. Or the other setting is FCPX is going to make a copy of the media and store it inside that library file every single time a new clip is imported. Then Final Cut is going to have its own copy for every single clip, meaning your whole project is going to be self-contained and completely independent from the source file. If that's the case, then you're never going to come across any offline or unlinked clips when you move or delete the source footage from their original locations. But here comes the big deal. Say you want to move the project, for example, hand it off to a different editor or bring the project with you to edit on a different Mac. All you have to do is bring that one single library file with you. Now, it's going to be a pretty big file because it contains all your media and possibly proxies as well. But as long as FCPX is up to date, any other copy of FCPX would be able to open your whole project just like that. But you should consider that working this way will consume a large amount of disk space because you are making another copy of all your media and saving it inside the library. But if you want to minimize storage consumption and choose to have the source media linked into the timeline instead, you still have the option to consolidate all those media files into the library later when there's a need for it. It takes like 3 clicks to start the process, but once it happens, it's going to copy your original footage into the library without altering the originals. But say if you change your mind again, the process is reversible. You have the option to bounce the files back to an external location. So if you're constantly handing off edits or moving projects between computers, this library system is pure genius. Those were for me the big considerations to use FCPX, but apart from that, there are also a few other minor things that I appreciate about this software, but they might be a bit more subjective. For example, general fluidity. Now, to be fair, I am running FCPX on a rather powerful version of the iMac, but the low latency of the UI and the responsiveness when you're scrubbing through your timeline just makes the whole editing experience quite a bit less tiring. Now, I risk sounding like a typical Apple fanboy saying this, but I think it really does come down to how optimized of a system this is. This is a software engineered by Apple running on Apple hardware. That's why it works so well. Also, Final Cut Pro 10 uses a magnetic timeline, which is quite different compared to a typical track-based timeline. Some people love it, some people hate it. I would have to admit that it did take me quite a bit of time to even accept it and then eventually get used to it. But once you get the hang of it, it's really, really good for edits that require a fast turnaround, just like YouTube content. It's basically a simplified version of track-based editing. It's anchored on a backbone of main content that's referred to as a storyline, and you basically attach supplementary content onto that backbone. For the bulk of my YouTube videos, that main backbone is usually the talking head, and onto that you attach your B-roll. It's very no-fuss and self-tidying, so you don't really have to worry about adding new tracks when you run out of them, or worry about video tracks versus audio tracks, or dropping a mono audio clip onto a stereo audio track. That's why I can say for fast-moving web content at least, FCPX is the best NLE for it. But also consider that FCPX's license is a perpetual license, meaning you pay once and you get to use it forever. So it is not subscription-based like Adobe's software, and I think at the moment Final Cut Pro 10's pricing is only $50 more than a year's subscription to Premiere Pro. Now, just to wrap this video up, the purpose of this video is not to try and sell you a copy of FCPX. I'm trying to share what I found helpful about this NLE and has benefited me as a user. It still depends entirely on your workflow and your preferences to decide whether or not this NLE works for you. And that sums up the video. If you enjoyed it, do consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon for more videos just like this, and I will see you in the next video. But until then, here's another video of mine YouTube thinks you should watch, or if you don't like a computer telling you what to watch, here's one of my latest videos.